Welcome to the Cohort podcast, where we give voice to the stories, struggles, and successes of Black women and non-binary people with doctoral degrees. I'm your host, Dr. Jamakola, and today we are honored to have with us Dr. Christina Cleveland, who holds a Ph.D. in social psychology from the University of California, Santa Barbara. She's a passionate advocate, author, and public theologian, and is the heart behind the groundbreaking book, God is a Black Woman, and the driving force behind the Sacred Black Women Retreat in Paris. With a blend of psychology, theology, storytelling, and art, Christina brings a unique perspective to justice advocacy. We can't wait to dive into her journey and what sacred Black womanhood means in today's world. So welcome, Christina, to the Cohort Sisters podcast.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
I am honored that you joined us, especially because you are on a writing retreat. So thank you for creating time and space in your day. I would love to know, where are you from? Where do you live now? What are some of the things that you like to do outside of the scholarship, the advocacy, and the work? Tell us about yourself.
Well, I currently live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I don't really live anywhere. I move often, and I think I've done 5 cross-country moves in the last 7 years.
Wow.
So like, who knows if I'll be here when this podcast airs. But that's where I live now, and I lived there before when I was in my early 30s, so it's kind of a return. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, though, so I'm a California girl. And I'm currently in central France, where I'm writing another book on the Black Madonna and the Black Madonnas of central France. And I come here every year for 2 to 3 months. So this feels like, and I have been doing that since 2018 with the one exception of 2020. So this feels like more like home. There's been more continuity coming here these last 5 years than anywhere else in my life. So I say I'm at home wherever the Black Madonna is, and she's in me too. So, so I guess and let's see, what do I do besides? I mean, I'm lucky because my work and my life passions go hand in hand. So I know that's very lucky and late stage capitalism. But what do I do besides my work? That's a good question. I love fashion and I love design. I love like vintage. Actually, tomorrow I'm going to go visit this really obscure Black Madonna that I had to go down like millions of internet rabbit holes to even find. But it just so happens that the little medieval village that she's in is also having their like annual antique fair tomorrow. So win-win. So I'll take like a 2-hour train ride out to where she is, spend some time doing some research, maybe even talking to folks about her, and then also enjoying antiques. So I love like vintage and antiques, and I love thinking about like interior design. And I've renovated a couple properties, kind of like low-key renovated, you know what I mean? Like more like down to the studs, but not anything deeper than that. So I do enjoy that.
Yeah. Nice. You're speaking my language. I'm an interior design super
fan.
I love it. That's like I call it like my retirement. Like that's what I'm going to do when I retire, is I'm going to just now like do interior design. And my parents, I grew up in a house with parents who were in the real estate industry. So I feel like it's like in my blood. So yeah, we can talk offline about real estate and flipping houses and interior design another time. I feel like that's a whole nother conversation. But we're going to get into your specific topic of your work about Black Madonnas and about Black women, sacred Black womanhood. I want to kind of first start at a disciplinary level before we get to the granular. How did you become interested in social psychology? Like how did that path emerge for you? And at what point in your young years or your academic journey did you realize, I actually want to do research for a living? I want to go around the world looking for Black Madonnas and I want to write about this. Like, when did that happen for you?
Yeah. So I actually I was a sociology and religious studies double major at Dartmouth. And then my sophomore year, I applied to this like study abroad program for the religion major, and I didn't get in. It was like in Edinburgh. And it was one of those things where like, totally non-extraordinary people that I knew got in, but I didn't. You know what I mean? Like it was like one of those things where I was like, why didn't I get in? You know what I mean? This doesn't make any, and I was pretty devastated because I was 19 and you don't have any perspective.
I'm like life altering, life shattering.
Exactly. I'm like, I'm at school, I still have my scholarship, I still have everything I need, but like for some reason or another, not going to Scotland this winter is like devastating. So I just remember having to scramble and to sign up for classes because I had assumed I was going on this trip. And then all that was left was like introduction to psychology, which I was planning on avoiding because it was all multiple choice tests. And there was like this very strong forced curve where only like 5% of the class could get A's. And this is Dartmouth. So like you could have a 98 percentile, you could be at 98% and still not be in that top 5%, just so I was afraid. But then I ended up having to sign up for Psych 1. Because I had nothing else to do because I didn't get into Edinburgh. And it actually worked out perfectly because you have to do research studies. You have to be a guinea pig, for Psych 1. Yeah. I think they still make you do that. Yeah. And so while I was doing one of the studies, I met this amazing professor who I was just asking, I guess, good questions according to him. I think usually people just want to leave as soon as they're done fulfilling their study. But I was like, I'm really curious about this hypothesis. Like, tell me more. And then I had like some critiques, of course, because I'm a Black woman. And I feel like we have a general, and this is generalization, obviously, but like we kind of have this like, we have the ministry of do better.
Yes. Yes. I love that.
Ministry, right? We care because we care, right? Yeah. And so he was just like, you're really good at this. Do you want to be my research assistant? And so he offered me a paid job, which I was a financial aid kid. So I'm like, I can't do any research for free. That is not a thing. But if you can pay me, I can be here. And so then he's the one who really told me, like, you're good at this. Apply to grad school, So I never really had this like big grand vision. And I think that's maybe the reason why I'm not still currently in like the formal social psychology discipline. My first 2 jobs were those. And so I have, I've done those publications and I've done that world. And it was always a like, don't love, like, cause I'm generally curious about things, but I was always much more interested in real life application than I think social psychology at the time. I think now it's easier to get more applied grants. Okay. Cause that was 20 years ago, but at the time it was like, I would ask questions and say like, I think this result is epiphenomenal. Like, I don't think it exists outside of the lab. And I would get in trouble for that. You know what I mean? Because I was in like a social cognitive psychology program where like all about isolating all the variables. And I'm like, but memory doesn't work that way. Memory works in the real world, so it never really vibed. And so eventually I think I started transitioning from just kind of like social psychology as an isolated discipline to integrating it more with justice work, which then at the time there was this like budding field called reconciliation studies. So I was sort of able to like reposition myself. And then I was able to get a job as a reconciliation studies professor. Okay. And that's what I ended up, and then I ended up going to Duke to be their professor of reconciliation at the Divinity School. So I just remember teaching at Duke Divinity and my students being like, Dr. Cleveland, where did you go to Divinity School? And I'm like, nowhere, I just teach at yours. So welcome to my class. And so my work about the Black Madonna kind of came out of being in the Divinity School world. And becoming really interested in looking for images of the divine that could relate to the Black female experience. And so it really just came out of my own personal need. I was kind of fed up with white Christ and even how white Christ shows up in Black church spaces, and then I was also just fed up with male Christ too, or exclusively male Christ. And so I went on my own journey. And then thankfully, I think between people's general interest and my ability to just continually reinvent myself, this is what I do now. My dissertation and cardiovascular reactivity and motivational states. Like, it's very interesting. This is what I do.
I did not know that. Wow, that is very different.
Very few people know that that's actually my background, is in like cardiovascular social psychophysiology.
Okay. Why did that end up being the thing that you studied in grad school?
Because I was doing social psych and I was really interested in motivation. And then this world-class like biopsychosocial researcher invited me to join his lab. And so it was really just like, cool, like this is a great opportunity to continue doing what I'm generally interested in, but have this like other methodology. And so then I just ended up learning a lot about the cardiovascular system. And it's funny when I go to like checkups and stuff because doctors are like, why do you know so much about the cardiovascular system? And I'm like, that's the only thing I know about. Like, don't ask me anything else about the body.
Interesting. I'm still trying to piece it all together, but so because you had the religion major, one of the majors.
No, I ended up dropping that major.
Oh, okay. Tell us that story. So it's like religion was the thing you were studying, and then you added sociology and religion, then you added psychology. You dropped religion, went and did a Ph.D. in social psych, but then you somehow still ended up in religion. So
it's just like, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if these things are ancestral. My family is like one of the like most celebrated families in the Kojic Church of God in Christ, which is the largest Black Pentecostal denomination in the United States, probably in the world. And so sometimes I wonder, is this just, I mean, my great grandfather is famous in that world. Well, was famous, and so many family members. So I just wonder if there's a connection there, but
interesting. Okay. So you had this, go ahead.
Go ahead. I mean, I think there are very few divinity schools that would hire me at this point, because a lot of people see me as like kind of witchy or like out there a little bit. So, I don't know, but never underestimate the power of tokenism, though.
True. If a box needs to be checked, someone might come looking for you.
I'm like, surely I've alienated them and burned all the bridges. And then the next week I get an email from some president somewhere being like, do you want to join our faculty? And I'm like, oh, y'all just discovered that Thomas Jefferson funded your institution and now you need to do something about it, like,
oh my goodness. I want to talk about, I want us to go back and talk about the time in the doctoral degree, but I want us to put a pin in the discussion about, because I think it's an important one, about people who, what I am like starting to call like, who do academia at the margins, like we're not like traditional academics, how we sometimes are very much sought after in the academic market, and sometimes not. It just really depends on the political, and as you said, like they discover something, they need to do some optic work. So I want to talk about that at some point, but I want us to go back a little bit and talk about your time at UC Santa Barbara. I'm curious, as you were deciding to go into a doctoral program, what was it about that specific program that stood out to you? Like, why study there as opposed to somewhere else?
Right. Yeah, no, I'm so that's such an interesting question, and no one's ever asked me that, at least in a public conversation. I am so lucky and blessed because that one researcher, Jay Hull, who's actually still at Dartmouth, he's close to retirement now, but I think he's the dean of social sciences now. But he and this other social psychologist who's actually Scottish, but just happened to be at my school for a couple of years on a 2-year contract, and he's really world renowned. His name's Neil McCrae. He's a really famous social cognition guy, and both of them were incredible with me, and basically came up with a list of schools where the faculty are both nice and smart. And they were like, they were like, this is really, and so there were some that I was interested in because I was interested in the researchers there, but just knowing their research, and they were like, absolutely not. You cannot even apply there. And Neil was great because he's like a gossip too. Like he's like really funny Scottish guy who like looks kind of funny and is like kind of awkward, but like randomly knows the scoop on like who's sleeping with who and like, just all the drama, right? And I was thinking about applying to this one school and he was like, you can't. I'm like, why is it? Because last week, 2 different faculty members at that school got in a fist fight in the hallway. Because they disagree on what self-esteem is.
Wow.
And so he was like, I will not even write you a letter if you apply there. Like, that's just toxic and you don't want to. And so they kind of identified a list of schools for me. And UCSB was always at the top because they were like, they produce incredible scholars. People go on to get great jobs. And everyone there, most of the faculty are like very well respected, but not like so famous that they're never there, that they're like celebrities.
Yeah.
They're like known within the field, but they're not known in the world. Yeah. And I had lots of friends who were like, oh yeah, I'm a PhD student at Stanford right now. And like, I never see my advisor because he's always on like CNN. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so they were like, you want someone who's going to be there for you. You're coming from a small liberal arts college. You don't want to get lost. So it's like, I'd gotten into some of the big name schools like University of Michigan and stuff like that. But when I went, I was just like, this is like a transnational corporation. Like it's grad students don't even know each other, it's just like, I was like, there were first year students in the spring were meeting other first year students for the first time. And I'm like, what is happening right now? Like this. And so they said, go to UCSB. Everyone there is great. And it's true. Like I had a really positive experience. I was a Ford fellow. Ford paid for most of my pre-doctoral work, which is the case for like, I know a lot of Black people, which is awesome.
Until recently, you've just had.
They just quit. Yeah, they just shut down the program, right? I mean, I'm glad I snuck in there because I don't know what I would have done without Ford. But I just remember going to their conferences and interacting with all the other people there, mostly Black people, and they would be like, "Yeah, my advisor thinks I'm stupid and talks down to me," and and I was like, "Wow, like my advisor's supportive, and I know he thinks I'm smart, and he like puts me up for things, and like like." I don't know, like I had I'm glad those 2 guys were really advocating for me and giving me the insight because I certainly got into like more big name programs, but I was just like, I think I'll just get lost. Like, I don't want to be one of those people who's like begging my advisor to take a look at my manuscript, that's just not. And then plus they were like quality of life. Like you don't underestimate quality of life in grad school. They're like, go to Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara wasn't that great as a Black woman in the 2000s. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what it's like now, but it was lonely as a Black woman. Santa Barbara I don't know. Santa Barbara is where like justice goes to die, I think, like it's just this sad escapism kind of place.
Okay.
For a lot of folks, it's really wealthy and the entire place kind of feels like a Mexican plantation because there's just so much wealth. And then you have all these like extremely poor, mostly Mexican folks who work in houses. So that part wasn't ideal, but the actual part at school, which is where that's where you spend like all your time when you're a grad student.
Right. Especially in the coursework years.
Also just because of my discipline, like we did lab research.
Yes.
So I couldn't have gone away to work on my dissertation, like my dissertation was me, taking hundreds of people through my study.
Yeah. I always forget that y'all psych folks, you can't go. Because after my coursework, I was like, I will see you when it's time to defend. Very different. So I've heard you call out a couple of advisors, your undergraduate research advisors, as well as your doctoral advisor. And so far, I've only heard you mention men. Were there any women, or especially Black women, mentors or advisors that you had on your journey, whether they were in your program or non-academic mentors and advisors?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I'll say when I was an undergrad, there was one, but I was so salty towards her. She was an undergrad, and I really feel bad about that because I get her now. But when I was an undergrad, we had a first year faculty member who was a Black woman. Her name was Jennifer Richardson. She's super amazing now. She's maybe like 10 or 15 years ago, she was a MacArthur Genius Fellow. Now she's at Yale. So she's amazing. But she was like 28, just out of grad school, and I did not have perspective. And she didn't really have time for me. Mm-hmm. And I took that personally. Yeah. Which is so makes sense. Yeah. You know what I mean? But also in retrospect, I'm like, she was the first tenure track Black woman in the Dartmouth psychology department ever. She was living alone in Hanover, New Hampshire as an unmarried Black woman at the time. She was trying to get tenure. Like, you're a little like, no, like you had unrealistic expectations for this woman, this precious woman, and she and I have interacted a little bit since, as I've grown up, and she's amazing. I've always thought the world of her. My feelings were hurt because I thought, oh, she's a Black woman. She should have time for me. And I wasn't able to see what demands she was under until I was in a similar position. Right. And I was just like, gosh, all these Black students want me to be their best friend. Yep. And I have the energy to do that. Yeah. Also, that's not my job. Right.
It doesn't get you any additional money. It does not get you any additional credit on the tenure file. It just,
compensate for white supremacy at this institution. Yeah. Like, it's like, that is not my personal burden, So, but just having her there, I mean, I took her social psych class, and like, I saw her. I feel like she's one of the reasons why I was even able to imagine going to grad school straight out of undergrad, because she did the same thing. She was 28 and a professor at Dartmouth, and so certainly her existence was a huge boost for me. Mm-hmm. But there were no Black faculty in the entire psych department at UCSB, not just in the social area, but in the entire psych department, there were no Black faculty. There were some Black women who were a few years ahead of me, and they were all three of them. There were three of them. All three of them were like really great towards me, like really supportive. They weren't in my lab and I wasn't interacting with them super regularly, but I saw them around like a few times a week, and they would always encourage me, give me advice, just whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's academia. Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't go to an HBCU, and so it was white and it was mostly male, especially because I was on like the kind of hard sciences side of psychology too. Like, I wasn't a relationships researcher, or, there are areas where there are more women, but in like the social psychophysiology and like cognitive side, it's really male. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did you feel like you mentioned being a Black woman in Santa Barbara was really difficult. Do you feel like being the only Black woman in your cohort was harder, or the only Black person in your cohort was harder, or being a woman in a male-dominated field was harder?
I'm looking back, and honestly, like, I can't tell if it's lack. I mean, I do feel like I've really grown in my critical race consciousness, so I can't tell if I just wasn't aware of some things. Mm-hmm. I have more examples of that in my high school and college years, where I'm like, ooh, if that had happened today, that would have landed differently on me than it did then. But in grad school, honestly, I felt pretty supported, and I felt as a woman, and even as a Black person, like, my cohort only had 4 students. The social cohort only had 4 students. And they were all great people. I mean, everyone was white of those 3, but they're all just like people who take seriously their own racial identity journey and gender journeys. And so I think I got lucky, because the people that I was spending time with, and then my advisor, and then just the relationships I had with other faculty were pretty positive. And honestly, you know, when I was a graduate student in the early 2000s, one of our faculty transitioned from man to woman right before our eyes. And that was like so supported in the department. Like, and it was so like, there were like, I mean, then that's like early on in like trans consciousness. You know, we're talking 2000. So I had this person as a man in 2003, and then by the end of 2005 they'd fully transitioned. So this is like very early on in and there were like emails from the department chair saying these are the pronouns you use, this is how you will treat this person, this is how, you know, it was like not even a question of how we're going to be as a community. Like there was no, it was like, this is how we're going to be. And that's like, I mean, years ahead. So I think it was a unique department in that sense, because there were a few things that were going on that were forcing the department to get serious about its own policies. And I will say the number one social, including racial stigma lab in the country was in our department at the time.
Okay.
So like, and all the other Black students were involved in that lab, and that advisor, I mean, or that faculty member was probably our one or two most famous faculty members.
Okay.
And so like, because there's so much power that person had in the world, their lab had a kind of an outsized influence on the department. And so I think that's part of the reason why I enjoyed relative safety as a Black person, because there were all sorts of people in the program who were like studying stigma.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Your advisors, they really advised you well. It sounds like a really great program for you. And hopefully it remains a strong program and a welcoming and safe program.
Yeah, I know most of the folks who were there with me are now retired, you know, like, and then we also had creepers too. Like there was this one faculty member we just called the lurker. Of course, there's always going to be, I mean, it's academia. So of course there are the stories of just like, oh, the lurker was trying to get me to go to lunch with him today. You know what I mean? Like stuff where you're just like, I know the spousal hires and the people where you're like, why are you even here? Why are you?
Oh my goodness, that's so interesting. When I was in grad school, we had no, at least to my knowledge, there was no faculty member who was like, ugh. But we also didn't have a culture in the department. There was not a single spousal hire. But now I'm in a department where there are several spousal hires.
Oh my God.
It's a completely different dynamic. Such an interesting, yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's so incestuous. Well, we hired, I'm blanking on his name now, but right when I was graduating, we hired this guy, this cognitive psychologist, who was going to be hired no matter what, but we got lucky because he's actually great. You know, like he came from like he's Canadian, came from a Canadian university, but like actually just prolific and like, you know, could have gotten tenure at UCSB on his own, but he wasn't even a spousal hire. He was one of UCSB's Nobel laureates was marrying his ex-wife.
Oh.
And right. And so obviously UCSB is going to do anything to keep their Nobel laureate at UCSB, right? And so, and he's in like economics or something, like not even in psychology, but he's marrying this guy's ex-wife, and this guy and his ex-wife promised that they would live in the same city until their kids were 18. Oh, God. So now she needs to move to Santa Barbara. He has to move to Santa Barbara too. Therefore, we had to hire him in psychology.
That's academia for you.
Bananas. This is bananas. Yeah. Like, you literally are not even married to anybody here. Like, you used to be married to somebody who's now married to somebody here. Like,
that's probably the wildest spousal hire situation that I've heard. But I think it's a good reminder for folks who might be on the job market now or thinking about the job. Sometimes it really has nothing to do with you. Like, there's a job posted, you're qualified. If you think that it's for you, and then you're like, wait, why didn't I get it? Because somebody needed to be hired because the Nobel laureate's ex-wife or the Nobel laureate's wife needed to be at the school. So I think that sometimes we don't really, in grad school, we don't realize all of the politics and all of the nuances that go behind bringing faculty on. And sometimes I feel like when we get rejections from on the job market, it can feel like, oh, it can feel like an indictment on us and our work. And oftentimes it has nothing to do with us or our work.
Can I add one more thing to that? Please. I also think it's also a reminder for those of us to ask for what we need too. Because I know so many people, especially young Black women, who are like, well, I would go there, but I don't know what my husband would do, or I don't know what my partner would do. I don't know. And I'm like, roll that into the negotiations. Once they've decided they want you, ask for the world. The worst they can say is no. And honestly, in academia, typically they will say yes.
Yeah.
Because that's
such a good reminder.
I mean, because you see white people out here with the audacity, and it's like, what do you need? Do you need more research funding? Do you need more startup? Do you need more time off? Like, always ask for more. Always ask for more.
Yes.
I always negotiate. I always ask for more. No, even if I like the offer, I always ask for more.
Yeah, because that's what you're supposed to do, and that's what you're expected to do. We don't often think that we're expected to, but like when you get an offer, it's given to you with wiggle room. There's always wiggle room. Always. Yeah. I'm glad this is going to help transition to our the next line of questioning that I want to ask, which is about when you're finishing graduate school and you started entering the academic world. Would love to just talk a little bit about your time in traditional academia, and then why and how you transitioned into more independent scholarship. So kind of coming out of graduate school, you mentioned earlier that you taught at Duke's Divinity School without a divinity degree, and that was an interesting time. What were some of the things that attracted you to an academic life? And then what were some of the things that maybe not pushed you away, but made you decide a different path? Let me put it that way.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I love about academia is I'm good at it. Like schools. I mean, I'm a linear thinker. I'm a visual learner. I'm a self-starter. I have a lot of strong independent learning skills. And so academia has always been easy for me, relatively. And that didn't change, grad school was the easiest. I went to a really tough boarding school, and that sort of prepared me for life. And then after that, college and grad school were basically a breeze for the most part. I mean, obviously I had to put work in and stuff, but I was ready to be there because of my high school education. So I think I like that. I like the flexibility of academia. And I also really liked that, even when I was in psychology, I had to be a little political about my research programs, because you obviously want to make sure you have at least one thing going that's going to get you tenure, but you can also choose, and so like I was genuinely interested in motivation and intergroup processes, and I was able to do that work. And then my favorite part is students. Especially when I was running labs and I had a bunch of undergraduates or graduates, because when I was at Duke, I had some graduate students working with me. I loved time, like kind of that one-on-one or small group learning and informal learning in the lab. So, and I love a captive audience. So, I mean, like teaching classes was always fun for me. So those are the things that I enjoyed about academia. I'm learning, like, I don't do institutions. Like if I grew up, I grew up in the church, I grew up in a family of ministers. And so when I think about gifting, I often think about like spiritual gifts or like fivefold ministry gifts or whatever. And so I would say I'm like prophetic, truth teller, like I'm great at just forging ahead and like challenging the boundaries. That's my gift. And I'm an integrationist. And so I think the silos of academia were really stifling for me, because I really am. I mean, I think I'm a strong social scientist because I've been very well trained. I think I'm an innately gifted theologian. And so it's been really important for me to be able to integrate those two. And there just aren't a lot of spaces in formal academia where that can be, that level of integration can be held and taken seriously. And so I just kind of got tired of siphoning myself off. I got tired of writing these like esoteric journal articles that nobody was ever going to read, which would have been fine if that's all I wanted to do, because that's great. You know what I mean? Like that work is important, and the 5 people who read it, it'll impact them and their work and that kind of stuff. But I'm also really interested in the public square. And it was just hard. It was hard to find spaces where I could do both. And then also just the bureaucracy of it. Like institutions just drive me a little bit bonkers. And the fact that it's so, I mean, maybe it'd be different if they were like womanist or something, but like it's so white and it's so male, and the standards are, and what matters and how to say it and who has power. And it was just, I mean, I just got tired of it. And also, it was always a like, don't love, like I was always like, I like my job, but but I know faculty members who like, this is their passion. They're like in the shower thinking about this, and they're like, go out for drinks after work, and they're still talking about their research. And like, that was just never me with my research. Until I found kind of this more integrated Black liberation and divine feminine stream. But there aren't a lot of journals that want to publish that work. And so then it was like, I'm going to write for regular people.
Yes. You were just setting up the transition so seamlessly. I want to, if anyone has not yet heard of your book, God as a Black Woman, I would love to know, okay, so you were teaching, you just kind of shared that the research you were interested in wasn't, for lack of a better term, it wasn't tenurable research, because like no one wants to hear, the traditional academic settings do not want to hear they got as a Black woman. So you decide to write for a public audience, but you still bring in your scholarly perspective, you still bring in the academic element. How did you think about kind of blending these two worlds? It's kind of, the book is part research, it's part memoir. There are a lot of personal, intimate details in it as well. How did you make that decision to combine both of those worlds and do it so seamlessly?
I didn't make a decision, at least not a conscious one. Someone who reviewed my book said, this is what Black female scholars do. Black female scholars incorporate their life experiences into their research. So I think it's just part of my innate ancestral gifting as a Black woman. I will say I was very intentional. The one thing I was intentional about, and maybe this gets to what you were asking, is I didn't want it to be like a thank you for coming to my TED Talk book.
Okay.
Like, I didn't want it to be all research and all data and all graphs and all information that will resonate with the white patriarchal imagination. Because I think the way of the divine feminine undermines all that. So I wanted to be really intentional. So when I first set up the book, I thought it was going to be essentially an apologetic. Like, here's why like white patriarchal thinking is wrong, and here's why the sacred Black feminine, the lineage of the sacred Black feminine, is an antidote to all of that. And then I just realized, no, I just want to tell my story and how it's mattered for me. And I'm going to include aspects that are valued in the white patriarchal world because they were valuable to me. Like, it was powerful for me to read this research and discover that, this image in the Judeo-Christian scriptures was twisted and used as a misogynistic tool, like that kind of stuff was really powerful for my journey. And so I was like, I want to share that, but I only put research in that supported my journey. I didn't write for skeptics, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I like that distinction. So it wasn't that I like that you also said that it wasn't necessarily like a decision. It was a natural consequence of you bringing your full self, your full Black womanhood to the work. So I appreciate that distinction. And for those who don't know, the book was inspired or was a result of a 400-mile walking pilgrimage that you did in search of ancient Black Madonna statues. And you are now you're preparing for another pilgrimage in 2024, a Black Madonna pilgrimage and a sacred Black women retreat. Can you share a little bit more about the significance of Black Madonna statues and how they're really related to empowering Black women?
Sure. So I will say the 2024 pilgrimage that I'm preparing for right now, that I'll be bringing Black women and Black non-binary people on, is not a 400-mile walking pilgrimage.
Okay, so the first one was your personal one was 400 miles.
This one is not. Yes, I love me some walking pilgrimage, and I do that often. But I also wanted to create an opportunity for people to experience the Black Madonnas without having that accessibility challenge.
Yeah.
I trained for months for that. So that's not something I would, and it took 5 weeks. So, but yeah, but I think from a social psychological perspective, we're constantly underestimating the power of the situation. That's one of the huge, contributions that social psychology makes to our understanding of like the way the world works. We typically underestimate. We tend to attribute people's behaviors and their identity to like individual internal sources rather than understanding how much the situation impacts us. And so I've always been really interested in that as a social psychologist, especially these like more implicit messages that we receive. And so, it's one thing for people to say, God is not a white man, or like all lives matter, or all people are all life is sacred. It's another thing to actually have implicit imagery and messaging that affirms that all people truly are sacred. And so for me, having grown up as a Black woman in an incredibly racialized and sexist country, surrounded by images of the divine that usually are affirming the sacredness of whiteness and maleness, it was really, really powerful for me in a full-on embodied way to encounter images of the divine that are Black and female. And I will say I feel like my whole body biology changed when I first laid eyes on a Black Madonna, and then learned more about the history. I mean, the global history, at least 2,000 years, but really more, because most of the Black Madonnas, especially in this area that I'm in right now, go back to Isis. And so they're like really, 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 the tradition of veneration is really old. Thousands and thousands and thousands, pre-Christian, basically. And so, yeah, so that's why I'm excited to bring people with me on the journey. Yeah, because there's just so much. Each Black Madonna kind of has her own story and her own tradition and lore and mythology. And to get into some of those stories is just fascinating. And then also to consider, what does it mean for us to really find ourselves in these stories and in these images and move forward in the world in a much more empowered way. And, when I first came to visit the Black Madonnas for the first time in 2018 for that initial pilgrimage, I was a professor at Duke, but I remember at the end of my 18, after I visited the 18th Black Madonna and I was about to come home, I said to myself, okay, I could go home and have this like cute spiritual experience. And actually at this point I had planned on writing a book, but I had not planned on including my pilgrimage at all. Actually, my editors are the ones who said, oh, you did a pilgrimage, we'll include that. Because I was thinking like an academic. So I was thinking like I had all these chapters on like, just the research. And they were like, no, we actually want you to share your story too. But I just remember coming home and thinking, I had my experience. It was powerful. I have everything I need to write a book. And I can do all that. Or I can decide to go home and be changed. And like my personal life be changed. And so then I started asking myself, if I truly believe that God is a Black woman, then why do I still work at this Duke plantation? Why am I afraid to leave? Why am I afraid that if I walk off this plantation, nobody's got me? If I say that I believe that God is a Black woman, or so I just started asking myself, what would I do if I really truly believed that God is a Black woman? How would I say no in this relationship to this person that I think I need their approval, or I think I need their resources, or I think I need their companionship, or so many things. If I truly believe that God is a Black woman, then how is that going to impact my bottom line when it comes to giving sacrificially to like Black trans organizations or stuff like that? How is this showing up in every aspect of my life? And so that's what became really important to me, was like the transformation piece. And so I feel like a lot of the work I did was after the pilgrimage.
Okay.
And I actually took about a year between the pilgrimage and when I even really started writing the book, because I wanted to like live a spirituality of the sacred Black feminine, not just have it in my head, which is such a like white patriarchy thing,
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, so many things in my life changed. I quit that in that year. I quit my job. I ended my marriage. I moved. I significantly changed my relationship to my parents. I mean, there were so many things that I was like, I finally believe that I'm sacred. So what does that mean?
Yeah. Wow.
And that's not to say that like everyone who believes they're sacred needs to leave academia. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that for me, I was on the Duke plantation and I was set up to be striving to be the most powerful Negro on that plantation. And there was no other option for me. I don't think that's true for everyone, but for me, I was realizing I'm only here because I'm afraid that I won't be provided for if I leave, and I'm afraid that I'm nothing without this institutional affiliation. And I had to be honest about that.
Yeah. Ooh, that's deep. Woo. Mm-hmm. That is so
like
deep.
Woman, and I make choices for my liberation. I have to trust that somehow abundance will provide.
Yeah.
If God's a Black woman, I don't think she wants me being abused in this situation or relationship or whatever. If God's a Black woman, I can go to sleep tonight knowing that I have enough for today, and there's wealth in that, even if I don't know if I have enough for tomorrow. If God's a Black woman, I can stop playing God, because Black women know how to handle things. I mean, the reason why I was constantly out there trying to control everything and hoard power and money and resources is because at the end of the day, I didn't believe that God had my back. Because God was this father, sky God, white male, Jesus, Zeus character, And I was like, how like, when you're a little kid and someone promises you something and you're like, I don't think this, I'm 5, but I don't trust you. I don't think you're going to come through. Yeah. Because last week you promised me a lollipop and you didn't come through. And so now I know. Yeah. That's how I felt about white male God, So I was constantly stressed. I got to hold on to what I have. Yeah. I have to, but I have this job. I have this opportunity. These people are inviting me to come. If I don't go, who will? If I don't say it, who will? Like all of this. And it's just like, exhausting. No wonder I have like 5, chronic illnesses now, because it's just like, it's too much to carry.
Yeah. Wow. Woo, you just gave me so much to reflect on. Wow. I feel like my mind is blown. I do want to honor your time. And so as we wind down the episode, there are 2 questions that we ask all of our guests who grace us with their presence. One is something that always throws people off. So I'm excited to hear your response. But what is one thing that you would do differently if you had to redo your doctoral journey? You had to do your PhD all over again for some strange reason. What is something that you would do differently?
Okay. I think I would have gotten a PhD in sociology instead of psychology.
Okay. Why is that?
Yeah. I enjoyed the sociology major more. Just they had more classes on race and urbanism, and Dartmouth, the sociology department was one of the more woke departments, where psychology was it was very neuroscience focused. So I think I enjoyed those classes more. I think I didn't see it as and I think I just had some of that white patriarchal hierarchy, well, psychological and brain sciences is more impressive than sociology, which seems a little feminine and whatever, but there are more female faculty in sociology usually and that kind of stuff. But I think sociology as a discipline suits my integrated and embodied way. I am really interested in complex systems, and I like that usually sociologists have to write a whole book about a thing. Can't just write an article. You have to kind of do a much more in-depth project in order, which just makes, I'm definitely I'm not a generalist. I'm very much there's three things in the world that matter to me. And for example, I'll go and talk to vintage dealers and be like, oh, that's so interesting. I've never seen a 1970s revival of a 1920s piece like that before. And they'll be like, are you a vintage dealer? And I'm like, no, I just like vintage, which basically means I have a master's degree in vintage. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so I think sociology kind of suits that, going deep.
Right.
Going deep for 5 years on one thing.
Yes. Yeah. You're the first person to say that they would have studied a different or been in a different discipline. So that is interesting. And then I was an undergraduate,
so that helped. I know enough about it to know that I would have probably done well,
right. But I'm sure you'd have done well wherever you are that kind of person, as many of us are. We will just succeed regardless.
We're just good at life. Yeah. And the more opportunities we have, because even my Black female friends who've had much less privilege than I do, when you look dollar for dollar, how much they make out of nothing. You know what I mean? It's amazing.
Yeah, we are truly amazing.
It is really amazing.
What is one final piece of advice that you have for current or prospective Black women and non-binary doctoral students?
I think I would just say every opportunity, every situation, whether it's a fellowship, a scholarship, a job offer, an invitation to collaborate or contribute to an edited volume, I would just ask myself, am I too sacred for this? And if the answer is no, then I proceed with discerning whether I want to do it or not. But the first question being, am I too sacred for this? Yeah.
This is me running through my brain, the list of things that I have already said yes to. Am I too sacred for this? Thank you so much, Christina, for leaving us with that existential thought and joining us on the Cohort Sisters podcast. It has been such a joy learning more about your journey, learning more about your work, and the inspiration that you give us all to reach inside of ourselves and find the divine Black woman that we all are. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Such a joy to be here.
Thank you again for listening to this week's episode of the Cohort Sisters podcast. If you are a Black woman interested in joining the Cohort Sisters membership community, or you're looking for more information on how to support or partner with Cohort Sisters, please visit our website at www.cohortsisters.com. You can also find us on all social media platforms at Cohort Sisters. Don't forget to subscribe to the Cohort Sisters podcast and leave us a quick review wherever you're listening. Thank you so much for joining us this week, and we'll catch you in next week's episode.